premiums have leveled. They're not dropping like a stone like they have been for the past few weeks since we've last talked. They've leveled, and the demand has really picked up again.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics, and it is that time of the week once again for our physical silver report with Andy Schectman of Miles Franklin. And as you can probably tell already, we're doing this one over the phone without video because Andy is about to leave the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, which he's been at for the last couple of days. And Andy, it's great to have you on here. Looking forward to hearing how the show was, although more importantly, how are you tonight, my friend?
Chris, I'm doing well, brother. I'm doing great. Forgot how much I enjoyed the warm weather of Florida. It's a little chilly here in Vancouver, but I'll tell you what wasn't cold was the feeling, the vibe at this show is anything but cold. In fact, it's red hot, and the interest, the number of people attending, the questions that were asked, and the seriousness really seems different than many, if not all, of the shows I've been to in the last, I don't know, several years, even prior to the pandemic. There's a whole new charge in the air that very much resembles what we've seen over the last couple of years, and it's very encouraging, to say the least.
And we'll touch on the show and everything that went on there as well. Although before we get to that, obviously the one thing I always like to make sure we cover each week is what's going on with the premiums. And it sounds like you were saying there's a bit more demand coming into the market, but why don't we start there?
Yeah, so the premiums have leveled. They're not dropping like a stone like they have been for the past few weeks since we've last talked. They've leveled, and the demand has really picked up again. I think people heading, into the new year are reassessing and reevaluating their positions and their outlook for the rest of the year. And we are seeing a much more vibrant demand and set of questions that were being asked really than we've seen in the past 6 weeks. As I mentioned to you before, I have never seen a period of time like we've seen since Thanksgiving, really until just after New Year's, where the market just shut down. And I really do believe that had a lot to do with people unwinding and seeing family for the first time in 3 years in a way that was unencumbered from everything we're used to since 2020. And I really do believe that added to why the market universally shut down, really. I mean, and that's not being overly dramatic. It really, from all aspects, from the top on down, from the big distributors to every retail company that I speak to, witnessed the same thing, a major slowdown in demand during the holidays. And that's really reversed over the last week or two. We're seeing much greater demand and really very large orders where I think people are looking at what 2023 is going to bring and beyond. And much to the same tune that we saw here, there's a seriousness to it. It's not about getting rich. And when we look at silver squeeze and the people that jumped in 2 years ago, I think a lot of it was opportunistic, looking to make money. And I think personally that's the wrong way to look at gold and silver. The vibe I'm getting now is that people are looking to the future and are protecting themselves against what is coming. They're looking to gold and silver as a life raft, as a value play, and as a defensive play rather than one that is used to get wealthy. And I think that is the right way to look at this, and that's one thing that we're seeing. So the premiums have leveled, the demand has increased, and if past is prologue, then I would suspect to see premiums move up again, albeit they haven't yet. And it's still, in terms of premium over spot, as good of a price as I've seen since 2019. And with the uptick in demand, I would honestly expect that we'll start to see premiums inch up little by little again. In fact, we did see that in the American Gold Eagle. Premiums to me jumped up by 0.25%. Now that's not a lot, But when you realize that they've been coming down for the past 6 weeks, I think it is emblematic of a shift, a trend shift in demand, and you're starting to see that especially here at the show.
Yeah, and in terms of that demand, I wouldn't imagine there's any chance you got a call from someone named Janet asking about $1 trillion platinum coin, is there?
No, I saw that. That was an interesting take. It's one that we've seen before. I haven't seen that, but I got a kick out of that. Still, platinum coins are only about $100 over spot. We're nowhere near $1 trillion yet, but hey, you know, it's a solution, I guess, a proposed solution to a big problem. But no, I haven't heard from Janet. I'd love to. Haven't heard from her yet. You'd be the first person I'd call on the three-way if Janet called.
Andy, one of the other things you mentioned there, you said, and maybe this is prior to the show or at the show, but that there's a new set of questions that people are asking. And I'm curious, are there different concerns that are on people's minds from what we've heard traditionally in the past, or anything you could share about that?
Yeah, I really do think that the people who are disappointed in silver's performance, those would be the people who invested over the last couple of years, many of which did it for the wrong reasons. It came on the heels of the GameStop and the AMC, and it was about making money. It was about buying something undervalued in an attempt to get wealthy, to see appreciation. And I think that's been very frustrating in an asset class that is counterintuitive to logic. And as I've said for a very long time, what I believe
that is a fair way of describing silver.
It is. And it's disturbing and distressing to people who bought it for a reason based upon a set of facts that would say, hey, silver should really outperform. And it didn't. It underperformed in dollar terms when you realize that we're facing 40-year high inflation and war and political chaos, not just here, but across the globe. And I think people have become disenchanted. Some people have. Those people who bought silver for the wrong reason. And look, I would be lying if I said I wasn't keenly aware of the price and understand that frustration, and am surprised myself that we haven't seen $30 silver in the rearview mirror. And we will again, but I think it is now shifting to people understanding that the dollar's in trouble, that the markets are in trouble, that the economy is in trouble, that the world is in trouble, and that gold and silver represent pure wealth. And I think we're seeing a shift, and a proper shift, to people understanding that asset classes in general have been distorted, and through easy money and low interest rates, and those distortions, I think, are beginning to become evident to the mainstream. We have seen an expansion just over the last 6 weeks in the mainstream. Most of the calls that we have been receiving are from people who have never bought metals before, which is interesting to me, a whole new awakening, if you will. And it typically happens in January, where people look and reevaluate their plans for the year and their outlook on the future. And I think that's what we're seeing. People are realizing that the outlook maybe is not filled with green shoots and optimism. And I hate to speak in a manner that is less than optimistic. I am optimistic for the future. I do believe there will be a period of difficulty where asset prices and interest rates find equilibrium. And I think there are people who are realizing that, seeing their portfolios at, down 20% or 25%, seeing their bond portfolio, which was a hedge against the instability of the markets, down 20% for the year 2022. This has woken some people up. And I think the proper way to look at precious metals is in the light of it being wealth. And as I've said over and over and over again, what betrays the price and the rhetoric is the massive drawdown of supply off of the exchanges. It's one thing to take delivery and leave it within the COMEX ecosystem. It's another thing altogether to take massive deliveries and pull them off of COMEX and off of the LBMA and off of the ETFs, because they are leaving the confines of a system that provides liquidity and moving it to who knows where. It's a one-way ticket. And I would argue the sophistication that it takes to make these moves is very significant, as is the dollar figures behind it. So when you look at the very top and see the people closest to the information making these moves, to me it gives me comfort that ultimately the price will accentuate itself. Until then, the biggest money in the world has been using the leveraged paper price to reposition. And I think that is what people need to focus on. Now, that might be above the heads of the people that are contacting us. They don't look at things this way. But for me and for the people who've been following you so keenly for so long, that would be my message, is that people are waking up because they sense something is wrong. Whether or not they can articulate it as well as you can, or as well as many of your listeners can, is debatable. But I think the reality of it is that people are waking up and they are realizing, in a world of distorted asset prices, that silver might be the most distorted of all of them. And the ironic thing is that distortion is to the downside. There are very few things that are distorted to the downside. Silver is, where everything else has been distorted to the upside. And that's what I take from all of this, is that the distortions are in our favor. And the big money is using that, kind of like the ninjutsu move, where you use the leverage of your opponent against them. That is what the big money is doing. They are using the leverage of a market that hasn't performed the way that it should, with rhetoric that is contra to the whole ideal of buying an undervalued asset to their advantage, and not just taking possession, but taking possession off of the exchanges, which removes a good portion of the liquidity, meaning it's a one-way street. That, to me, is what people should focus on more than anything, because the big money who's closest to the information always positions themselves ahead of the crowd before the crowd even catches on. And I think some of the crowd is catching on because in their gut, they feel something just isn't right. And that's really the feeling I'm getting about the people we're talking to these days.
Yeah, I could imagine that. And something that I was curious if this perhaps got any attention at the conference. I know it just came out in the past couple of days. But did you see that there was a report by the IMF recently released where they were talking about gold not being a barbarous relic anymore, and some of the reasons that the central banks have been turning to gold? I guess that happened right as the show was beginning. Did you happen to see that? Were people talking about that much at the show?
Yeah, very much so. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things Lynette Zhang brought up, that the IMF was talking about gold in a favorable light, and she believes that the IMF, in conjunction with the West, will issue a gold-backed central bank digital currency. And I thought that was very interesting. It's something I haven't given much consideration to, but if you realize that the IMF, which is a conglomerate of roughly 150 countries, was formed at the Bretton Woods meeting in 1944, I believe, or 44, I think. Anyways, at the Bretton Woods meeting, these are Western influenced countries that would, if we were to see a new currency, a special drawing rights, if you will, emerge from the IMF, that there would have a significant gold backing or pegging to it. I found that to be very interesting. So yes, we have heard about it, and I can't say that I disagree with Lynette. It is certainly a possibility. In fact, I was asked a question today in an interview I did with Kitco, and they asked me what could derail this global de-dollarization move, where the BRICS nations are growing with popularity and with numbers, and the potential to them issuing a currency that would be pegged to commodities that would derail the dollar. And the question she posed to me is, what could derail that? She said, could it be war? And the more that I thought about it, I thought, yeah, I don't think it's war, what you could argue we're in the midst of a proxy war. But what I did say to her is that if the U.S. were to beat the BRICS nations to their own punch, through the IMF perhaps, issuing a gold-backed digital central bank currency, an IMF special drawing rights pegged to gold on a distributed ledger technology for the whole world to see the transparency of what is pegged to the currency, maybe, just maybe, that would stem the tide out of dollars. And that stemmed from, no pun intended, the IMF article that I think certainly has validity to it, if nothing else through speculation. The BIS said that every country that is a member of the Bank of International Settlements, and I don't know how many countries they are, but a lot, they all have to have an operational CBDC by 2025. So it seems to be falling into place for certain. And if the U.S. wanted to go on the defensive, the way, or the offensive rather, the way to do that, in my opinion, would be to beat the BRICS to that punch. We also heard recently that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a defense, security, and economic regional conglomerate, the biggest regional group in the world, comprising 60% of the Eurasian landmass and nearly 60% of human population, 40% of global GDP, is also talking about using a gold-backed currency for Eurasian settlement. So the word gold and gold-backed is becoming more and more and more pervasive. And the more you hear of this, the more desensitized we become. And maybe, just maybe, it is going to be a reality. So when you mention the IMF article, I think it's very timely and also very apropos. So like you say, I guess we'll have to see. But, Occam's razor, the most logical explanation prevails. And it doesn't seem too far-fetched for me to see the IMF come out, make this admission, and start to gradually integrate gold into the vernacular. So when it does happen, and we do have a CBDC pegged to gold, that people will look at it with legitimacy rather than uncertainty and skepticism.
Well, that makes sense, and I suppose that's also perhaps understandable and natural in these types of things. I mean, probably before the U.S. went off the gold standard, when people were speculating about that, it's the kind of thing that until it happens, it seems pretty far-fetched. And, all you can do is read the tea leaves out there and look at the clues, and again, you make the best decisions based on what you think's happening, and certainly that's something that we will continue to do. And either case, appreciate everything that you're sharing there. And I know you have a flight to catch on your way back to Florida, although before you wrap up, if there are people who are in the market for silver, anything on special this week that they would be well served to know about?
Yes, please send an email to Arcadia@milesfranklin.com. We will send you a current price list. This week we have on special 2023 silver Philharmonics at $329 over the price of silver. They were double that 60 days ago. So the premiums have really come down. And honestly, they are priced roughly at that rate, 50 cents, 60 cents above what they have been sold for the majority of my career. When we talk about an era, the last 3 years of high premiums, these aren't high. In fact, these are low and historically just a couple percent above where they always were. So for the person looking to buy coins, it's the best value I've had in 3 years, and happy to be able to offer them. And we do have about 40,000 of them that just hit the floor and ready to be delivered immediately at $329 over spot, any quantity.
Appreciate you also checking in from the show and sharing what you're seeing out there. And hopefully, as always, this was helpful for people at home. And Andy, I just hope you have a safe flight. And thanks again for providing a physical silver market update this Tuesday. And look forward to checking in with you next week.
Sounds good, my brother. You have a wonderful week, too. Thanks, as always, for having me. I hope you and everyone out there has a great rest of the week. And I'll look forward to checking back in with you from Florida, and we'll do it again next week.